Ever wondered what the real cost of convenience is in our digital world? Tim Jensen, host of Intentionally Inconvenient, dares to question if convenience is truly the enemy of privacy. You'll explore the essence of privacy, why it's worth pursuing, and debunk the myth that it's a lost cause. Together, you will challenge the notion of, I have nothing to hide, and reveal why every bit of your information matters. Remember, all hope is not lost. It's time to reclaim your privacy in this intentionally inconvenient reality.
Hello and welcome to Intentionally Inconvenient, where we talk about personal freedom through securing your privacy. My name is Tim and I am your host. In our last episode, we talked about 5 things that you can do today to begin your privacy journey. Today, we're going to take a bit of a step back, but I wanted to give you those pieces last time. Today, we're going to discuss what I believe to be the basic principles of privacy for individuals today. I think it's important to have a basic set of principles that you operate by in any endeavor in life, because you will not deviate from those principles, and then the actions and the decisions that you take, the decisions that you make are all made based on those principles that you have decided upon. It reflects your beliefs. It reflects your personal system of operation. So let's get started. Every action that we take when it comes to personal privacy, should be guided by a set of basic principles. They should reflect your personal beliefs, and these beliefs will help form the model that we carve out for ourselves in regard to personal privacy. So let's begin with our first basic principle of privacy with the definition that I gave you last time. Privacy. Privacy is the right to control access to ourselves. Privacy is the right to control access to ourselves. We should have the decision rights when it comes to controlling access to ourselves. Access would include things like physical access, property access, and information access. Secondly, personal privacy is not an excuse to avoid the government, nor to break the law. So a lot of people think that, I might be considered hiding something if I'm not giving out information. No, that's not what I'm talking about. We're not talking about avoiding the government. We're not talking about breaking the law. We're certainly not talking about being disingenuous if a police officer were to talk with us or so forth. It's very important that you're always upfront and honest with the government, with a police officer, with a judge, anybody in the government position. You need to deal with 100% transparency. Number 3, and this is a big one, and this is really the first big guiding principle for personal privacy that I like to consider, and that is limit trust. When you limit your trust with businesses, it limits your vulnerability in the case of a data breach. That's the first point. Only the information that the business has will be breached. And if you give out something like an alias or other kind of information, only that information is breached. Now, so depending on where the breach occurs, you could even possibly track the source of the breach and take appropriate action based on that knowledge. Your alias that you give may indicate the business that had the data breach, and you may find that out quickly. It may take a while, but at least you can then take appropriate action based on your knowledge of which business had the data breach. Businesses aren't always known for being upfront and immediate when it comes to data breaches. The law has given them in the past up to 90 days before they notify you of a data breach. Now, if they wait 90 days to notify you of a data breach, what could possibly go wrong? I think that's a really big concern that you should have. By limiting trust, that helps to avoid the vulnerability that happens during those 90 days. Let's see, where am I here? Depending on where the breach occurs, when breaches occur, that information could end up in the hands of hundreds or thousands of other people. And so it's important to know where the breach occurs, and you can track that a lot of times. Limiting trust with individuals limit your vulnerability with big technology. Now, what do I mean by that? People regularly, when they get your contact information, your name, your address, your phone number, your email address, where's the first place they store that? People don't use Rolodexes anymore, do they? What do they use? Their personal cell phone. These days, this is being recorded in February of 2024. When people put information like your contact information into their personal cell phone, that gets backed up. Where does it usually get backed up? It gets backed up to the cloud. And we all know that the cloud has to be owned and operated by a company. Guess what that company has in the past probably done with that contact information? They have stored it themselves, and many times they've sold it. And if they haven't sold it, it could possibly have been part of a data breach. What could possibly go wrong? So, through no fault of your own, when you give out your contact information and that goes into somebody else's personal cell phone, suddenly that contact information is in the hands of a lot more people that you did not intend to have that in. Unfortunately, the courts have said that once you make available that information to a third party, you no longer have the control or the rights to that information and keeping it private. So we have to be diligent in limiting our trust with even with people that we know. And there are tactics and techniques that we can use to do that so our friends can still get a hold of us, and yet big tech doesn't get our personal information, our true email address, our true whatever. Okay, moving on. Data brokers, a lot of times, can get a hold of that information. Consider trust to be on a need to know basis. Who needs to know it? What do they need to know? When do they need to know it? And how long do they need to know it? All that's important. For instance, if you're at a retail store, a lot of times the clerk these days will ask you, "Can I get your email address?" Do they really need to know your email address? What could possibly go wrong? What are they going to do with that email address? All I'm doing is buying this widget. Do you really need my email address for me to buy it here, now, in front of you? You have to decide that. Or maybe let me get your phone number. Do you need my phone number? I'm right here. You don't need to call me. I don't think we need to be difficult with clerks. They're just doing their job. That's not my point. My point is, why do they need the information? And can we give them alternative information to be able to maintain that relationship that we're having at that moment, but at the same time, not compromise our personal privacy and make ourselves vulnerable, really through no fault of our own? Do they really need to have you create an account with their business? If so, do they really need to know your main email address or your phone number or your mailing address? Do they really need to know that? And if they do, what could possibly go wrong? Again, we are limiting trust with businesses as best we can. In regard to online accounts, how much does that website or business need to know about you? Really? If you're signing up for an online account of any kind, think to yourself, what kind of business am I going to transact with this business, and how much information of mine do they really need to know? Chances are you could get by with maybe giving them an alias name and still transact business with them. You can store that in a personal password manager. It will store that profile in that password manager so that the next time you go back to that online account, you can still communicate the same information the next time you're there. Could you give them a burner phone number or maybe a voice over IP phone number? Could you give them an email alias or an email forwarder address that will also reverse alias so that when you send it back, it comes back to them under the email address that's the forwarding or alias email address? That's very realistic in today's society. It's not very difficult to accomplish. Next topic under limiting trust. Avoid dependence on one entity for multiple products and services. All-in-one solutions create dependency. When I say solutions, that's a business term. Your radar should go off immediately when you hear solutions whenever a salesperson says it, because really all that means is they're going to sell you something, or they're going to try to sell you something. I know I've been in sales for a lot of years, but these solutions, they can create dependency on that business. And it can be a form of slavery if you think about it. When you're really dependent on that company for year after year, it makes it more difficult to move to a different company for that same product or service. Google is a good example, and I have a list here in front of me that I'm going to read to you. All of the different services, and this is actually just a partial list until I got tired of putting all these in here. Google has email that people use, and GPS, and their calendar, and their browser, and search, and media, advertising, and communication, publishing, productivity tools, statistics that they gather from websites, business tools, healthcare tools, developer tools. And by the way, I got all this from Google's website directly, so I'm not making any of this up. Security tools, operating systems, desktop applications, mobile apps, hardware like the Google Pixel phone or the Chromebook or other types of mobile phones. There's a ton of them. There's wearables, there's watches, there's the Jamboard, the Hub, the home Internet of Things or IoT products, devices, things like the mini speaker or the smart speaker or the Mac speaker or the Chromecast or the Nest thermostat or the Nest X Yale, which is a smart lock that you can lock by doing something on your phone, or the Nest Secure, or the Nest Hello, which is a smart doorbell, a thermostat, which is different than the Nest thermostat, Wi-Fi, and that's just to name a few things of Internet of Things. And then there's the Pixel tablet, there's the Pixel laptop, there's the Chromebook, there's other services like the cloud, Google Fi, public DNS, Firebase, Cast, Pay, YouTube, YouTube TV. And that's just when I got tired of writing them down and putting them on my notes here. There's a ton of things, and it's all free for the most part. Let me get your attention here for just a second. I want you to listen up. I want you to pay close attention to what I'm about to say. If the product or service is free, you are the product. If the product or service is free, you are the product. Don't ever forget that. If someone offers you free email, if they offer you a free video service, if they offer you a free whatever, they are collecting data on you, personally identifying information. We talked about that in the second episode of this podcast. You are the product. Your data is going to be sold to data brokers. Now, maybe you don't care about that, but I want you to do a test. I want you to go to your favorite search engine, type in your first name, your last name, your city and state, if you're in the States or province or whatever you call it, and do a search. And find out how many websites are publishing your name, your address, your phone number, your current email, your past email. It's incredible how much information that these companies are publishing for anybody to get. Anybody can get it if you're not careful. I don't know about you, but to me, that's a big deal. That's a huge invasion of privacy. I never signed a form that said, you have my permission to publish my contact information, my location, my address, any of that stuff. I never gave them that permission, and yet they're doing it. And it's legal. It's legal in the States for that to happen. It concerns me a lot, and it should concern you, because you don't know who's going to get that information and what could happen. Like I said, what could possibly go wrong? Think about that. Okay, moving on. Next thing that I'm going to recommend is that you dilute your personally identifying information using aliases and pseudonyms, or even with a password manager. Let's say you don't completely trust, and this is a big deal, putting all your eggs in one basket, putting all of your passwords and all of your contact information in one spot, like a password manager. And maybe you've got 100 or 200 or 300 different passwords and websites that you're using. What happens if if that company has a data breach? There have been password manager companies that have had data breaches. And I don't know about you, but I think to myself, what could possibly go wrong? Because now they have every single one of my passwords and usernames to every one of my websites. And now they have, if they choose to, illegal access to all of all those websites, all those accounts. What could possibly go wrong? So consider this. For the password manager, maybe you have a 6, a 7, 8, 9, 10 digit additional code that you add to the end of every password or to the beginning of every password. I'd say the end, but whatever. And so that your entire password is not even in your password manager. So now you're limiting trust to the password manager for just the first 10, 15, 20 characters. And then you add that 6 to 10 digit code at the end of that. Now you've got a password that no one entity has complete control of, because you probably don't know the first part of the password, and the password manager doesn't know the last part of the password. What a strategy. What a great idea, with the best of intentions. I like it. Okay. After limiting trust, the next part to remember, and this kind of ties back to the whole all-in-one device thing going on that I talked about with Google a minute ago. Convenience is the enemy of privacy. Now, you've heard me say that in past episodes as well. It's worth repeating. Convenience and privacy are opposites. And all I got to do is mention that to people, and they already understand what I'm talking about. If it's convenient, it's probably an enemy of your privacy. Usually, if something is convenient, you're giving up some form of your privacy. Think of any time you have to open up an account as an opportunity for data collection for that company. And I put in my notes, account equals data collection. Account equals data collection. If you have to create an account, they are going to collect your data. Let me give you an example. Every Friday morning, before I head out to my church for a men's Bible study that we have at our church, I step on the scale and I want to see how much I weigh. That scale came with the ability to Bluetooth that data to my phone. And all I had to do was put an app on there. Now, this was before I really got into the privacy realm of life. And so I didn't even think anything of it, that it was uploading that to the phone, and by proxy, somebody is collecting that, the company that made the scale. One day on my phone, I've changed phones since that time, and I'll explain that in another podcast as to why I changed phones. There's a number of reasons, one of which is we changed phone companies. But I turned off the location access to that device. I kept the phone after I changed services, because I still had that data on there. And when I turned the location services off in the settings on the phone, the scale wouldn't work. It said, please turn location services on to continue. What does a scale need my location for? I'm not on the moon. I'm not on a planet. I am at my house. What does a scale need location services for to collect my weight? Then I got to thinking, what I like to say a lot, what could possibly go wrong? I don't know, but medical information is not really easy to change. You can't really change it. Why do they need my location? I had another example with something like this where I had to create an account to test my blood sugar. I would have my diabetic supplies. I poke my finger, I got the test strip, it plugs it in to the meter, and then that meter I can record that information into an app. And the meter and the app aren't related, but I would download application after application to just record those numbers so that I had a pattern in front of me as to where my blood sugar readings were. And they made me create an account before I could use their app. Why do I need to create an account to use the app? Because they're collecting data on me. I finally found two applications in a different app store, not the Google Play Store, not the Apple Store, but a different one called F-Droid, that had two applications that would allow me to record my glucose information without having to create an account. I tell you what, data is a big business in our technology society today. So accounts equal data collection. Keep that in mind. When you have to create an account, there's data collection going on. Convenience is the enemy of privacy. Convenience today may result in the loss of privacy tomorrow. Multiple services come from the same business. The cost of free is astronomical. I said this before, if the product or the service is free, you are the product. Customer loyalty programs. Oh my goodness. Customer loyalty programs. Trading discounts in exchange for personally identifying information. Now, of course, customer loyalty programs are, you go to that business, you spend your money, you use your card, you get a discount, but then they keep track of your purchases. And so they know what you bought, they know when you bought it, they know where you bought it, and that helps them to market to you better. There's a win situation there. With customer loyalty programs, maybe it's your grocery store. We have our local grocery store doing an agreement, a joint venture, if you will, with local gas stations so that when you buy your groceries, you can get cents off of your gas. And so I don't know how that information is being exchanged. But there's an awful lot of tracking that's going on. They called it metadata back when Edward Snowden had his revelations back in 2013, and they made it so benign, so not important. It's just metadata. Let me tell you something. Your cell phone company and your internet service provider and your email company and all these people can access something on your phone called a serial number. And that serial number can't be changed on your phone. And then they tag that information to your name. And so every time something comes now, they can pull out the serial number. And since it's a phone, they got your phone number. And then they've got your email or they've got your loyalty program, whatever. All that metadata can be put together and packed together like a snowball. And now we've got it all right there. And we can attach all that information and we can predict the future in a way. So there's some definite value to this metadata. There's some definite value to this data out there that is being collected because you got a free this or a free that. If the product or the service is free, you are the product. Remember that. It's a very important concept. If you're using the same username for multiple accounts, normally it's an email address. Even if you don't put your name in it, that can be tracked all the way around the internet. Very easy to do. Now let's say that you don't even change your password, but you use the same password everywhere and the same username. What could possibly go wrong? A lot, because if I use the same password on this website that's being used on that website and I'm a hacker or I'm a thief or whatever, now I can go into all of these places and I can just randomly put in that username and password. And boy, I'll tell you what, if I hit the jackpot, what other information can I get? Do you see the concern here? Privacy is not a big deal to people until you lose it. Like I said before, it's like air or water or money. It's not a big deal to people until it's gone and you lose it. Okay, we got to continue because I am taking way too long on something like this. I get a little wound up sometimes. Using a company's app rather than going to their website. Now, because they have created the app, they have control of the environment, they can collect a whole lot more data than if you just went to their website. They can still collect data, but it's a lot less likely that they'll get all the data that they may want. So, convenience is the enemy of privacy. Let's move on. Privacy is not on by default. You need to assume this at all times. In every situation, when you're asked to create an account, when you're asked for personal information, you need to assume that privacy is not on by default. Most of the time, you will need to ensure your privacy by taking some kind of action or actions, and that will vary based on the situation. Next, privacy is not just for the tech savvy person. Privacy is more about mindset and behavior habits than it is about technology. Technology is used to accomplish an end, but technology is not the whole point behind the privacy. As a matter of fact, technology has made it easier for businesses to collect, gather, even steal your information than ever before. Back before we had the internet and cell phones and this kind of stuff, we still had data collection going on because let's face it, you need to know as a business what your return on your investment is when you invest in advertising. So they collected all kinds of data. You may remember in the mail order days of the 70s and 60s where you would have to go send your $5 and this form to such and such a business, Department R, and then P.O. Box, blah, blah, blah. That department was a tracker. And that was you willingly putting down where you saw that advertisement so that they knew if that advertisement was getting them a good return on investment. These days, it's done by cookies. It's done by all kinds of artificial intelligence, probably. I'm not really into artificial intelligence to know, but I'm sure there probably is something to that. There are all kinds of ways to tracking clicks. You track if a link is sent out, a lot of times there is a tracking tag at the end of it that helps that business determine who's going to their website and who's not. Okay, let's move on. It's not just for the tech savvy. Privacy is about mindset and behavior habits. You need to create good privacy habits, and I'm going to get into that in future episodes. I've taken long enough already with a lot of this. Habits are automated decisions. Habits are automated decisions. They are decisions that you have consciously made, that you have automated into a habit. And so we don't have to think about those habits anymore. We just do them. You don't need to be a coder in order to use technology, just like you don't need to be a mechanic to use a car. Very simple. Privacy, next point. Privacy starts with prevention. Prevention is intentional. You didn't accidentally fall into privacy. You have to be intentional in the actions that you take to maintain your privacy. Prevention takes work, it takes effort, and it takes being educated on what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. We should have, this is point 8, we should have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, I'm not talking about extreme privacy. I think there's reasonable expectations of privacy out there where we can expect a reasonable amount of privacy if we take a reasonable amount of action to protect it. But we should always have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And at the same time, just remember that it's not on by default. You should always have the right to make your own decisions. And that's part of reasonable expectation of privacy, is the right to make your own decisions. And you should be able to live by your own standards. You should not attempt to live by somebody else's standards. So everything I'm saying here may not be your standard. And if it's not, don't live by my standard. Don't trust some dude on the internet that you see, or some podcast that you listen to, or some video that you see on YouTube. Test it and make sure that it's for you. It may not be. You have to decide your own model of privacy. Number 9, and there's only 11 of these, so I'm getting to the end here. You are the first line of defense for your personal privacy. You can't leave that in the hands of another person or a government or a business. You are the first line of defense. You are ultimately responsible for securing and maintaining your privacy. You need to ask questions. You need to challenge, why do you need that? Or is that really necessary? Or whatever the question is. You remember when I talked about limiting trust. Don't be afraid to protect your privacy. You have something to protect. You're not trying to hide anything necessarily, but you are trying to protect things. Next one, the second to last one, privacy can and should be reclaimed starting today. So what do I mean by that? We all know that there are data breaches that happen every day, all over the country, all over the world. And yet, what happens is we just give up. and we say, it's already out there. There's nothing I can do. Yes, there is. Why do I say that? Because the most valuable data to any hacker, to any data broker, to anybody who's buying and selling data is current and recent data. I'll get into that in just a second. So some things you can do to reclaim your privacy. Be invisible in plain sight. What do I mean by that? Blend in public. You don't necessarily need to wear everything that has a logo. You don't need to stand out. You don't need to have outlandish behavior. Try to blend in, and your privacy, you'll find, is maintained better. Avoid standing out in public. And I don't mean physically standing, I mean you stand out. Privacy happens in layers. You want to avoid single points of failure. What do I mean by a single point of failure? Single point of failure is where all I need is your password and I can get in. That's a single point of failure. You want layers of privacy so that it's more difficult for someone. Maybe they get past the first layer, but they don't necessarily get past the second layer. Think of an onion. If you've got an onion, you peel off a layer, and what's underneath that layer? Another layer. You peel off that layer, and what's underneath that? Another layer. Now, if you keep peeling off layers, eventually you'll find out what's inside. And guess what's inside of an onion? Nothing. There's nothing there. The onion is just the sum total of all its layers. Now, there's a use for all that, of course. But my point is that you need to create layers upon layers of resistance so that people don't just access your house. People don't just access your online accounts. People just don't access your bank accounts, your financial records, your personal identifying information. You don't want them doing that. So we want to avoid single points of failure. There's a biblical verse that says a cord of three strands is not easily broken. It's referring to marriage, about the husband and the wife and God, all in the three strands. If layers are inconvenient for you, they're also inconvenient for others. Let time be on your side. You want it to be intentionally inconvenient for others. Yes, it's going to be inconvenient for you, but again, we're developing habits here of privacy, and eventually it will be very quick and easy, and we'll know exactly what to do. It's a little awkward at first, but being intentionally inconvenient means layers of privacy so that other bad actors, they move on to the easy, low-hanging fruit, the easy pickings. You want them to go to the low-hanging fruit as much as possible. Backups, you want to, let's see here, where am I? Oh, yes. Back up your data regularly. You want redundancy in backing up, so multiple backups, and you want it to happen automatically as much as possible. This is an area where convenience is on your side, because if it's more convenient, you'll do it. In this case, if you can have data redundancy, this avoids the single point of failure. So we all know hard drives fail on computers. So if you can back up multiple backups, you have you're less vulnerable in losing that data because it's in multiple places. Now, along with that, like I said, they should be regular and automatic when possible, but redundant backups should be located at more than one physical location. And this is to prevent loss in a fire. This is to prevent, let's say you get robbed. They only robbed the one copy, but you've got another copy at a different physical location, wherever that may be. So redundant backups should be located at more than one physical location. Compartmentalize to protect your privacy. What do I mean by that? You want separate access. So if you access your email, try to access it in only one spot at ever. And then access to social media, that should be accessed from a different device. And access to financial accounts should be accessed from a different device. Now, why do I say this? So many times there's this principle in the privacy area called social engineering. Social engineering is where there are people out there that are actors, literally actors, and they are trying to steal your data by fooling you, deceiving you into giving it to them. Now, maybe you're not handing it over to them. Maybe what's happening is they send you an email that said your invoice is attached to this email, and when you click the invoice, all of a sudden you have ransomware on your computer, and you now have lost your data because it's been encrypted. That's a problem. If you compartmentalize certain things, your email, from your social media, from your financial records, you'll lose less data in case something like that happens. Now, don't get me wrong, the social engineering happens to everybody. Everybody gets fooled at one time or another. I have clicked links when my company was doing this test for a month that they told you up front, we're going to send you these emails, and we're just trying to give you practice so that you know what to look for, and if it's fraudulent, you'll recognize it faster. And I still clicked on one of them, even though I'm this privacy guy now. I still clicked on one of those emails because I just wasn't paying attention. By having all of those things separate in different devices, you limit your vulnerability to losing everything. Maybe you only lose the email access on that device, but you didn't lose all of your backups. You didn't lose all of your everything. So keeping those separate, keeping them compartmentalized, remember that word, compartmentalized, is going to make you less vulnerable. Maybe it's banking, it's investment accounts, or cryptocurrency if you're into that. It's something to consider. Another way to reclaim your privacy, consider aliases to compartmentalize your personally identifying information. This goes back to the concept of need to know, and we'll get more into detail in another episode. Okay, last point, and I'll be quick about this. Decentralize control of things in your life. Who's really in control when it comes to gaining access to you? Centralized control usually means one central entity, like a government or a particular business that controls a certain aspect of your life. Think of centralized control as a monopoly of sorts, AT&T or Microsoft or Google or Meta or whatever, where they have control of their environment and you got to play by their rules because you're in their sandbox. When it comes to your personal privacy, if you can decentralize control of certain aspects of your life, where you're the one in control, that's a very good thing. We'll get more into that another time. It's a very important conversation that we need to have. So, my final thoughts here. Things are posted on the internet forever. It's very difficult to get things removed once they're out on the internet. People make copies, websites, that kind of stuff make copies. But this doesn't mean that you still can't be working on reclaiming your privacy starting today. Remember that, like I said before, the most valuable data to businesses is current or recent data. Higher prices are paid for current and recent data than any other kind of data. Anything that's a year old or 3 years old or 5 years old isn't as valuable because a lot of times it's out of date and it's no longer accurate or current. So what this means is, to me, is that the best time to protect your privacy was like 30 years ago. And the second best time is today to start protecting your privacy, protecting your data. It's right now, today. So let's review the 11 points. Privacy, number 1, privacy is the right to control access to ourselves. Number 2, privacy is not an excuse to avoid the government. It's not an excuse to break the law. You should be upfront and honest with the government and with law enforcement. Number 3, we need to limit trust. This limits your vulnerability and dependence on others like companies and so forth. Number 4, convenience is the enemy of privacy. Number 5, privacy is not on by default. It's not automatically included. Number 6, privacy is not just for the tech savvy any more than cars are only for mechanics. Next, number 7, privacy starts with prevention. Number 8, we should have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Number 9, you are the first line of defense for your privacy. Number 10, privacy can and should be reclaimed starting today. And finally, decentralize control of your information. So until next time, I'm Tim Jensen, encouraging you to protect your personal privacy by being intentionally inconvenient. Thanks for listening.
That's all for now from Intentionally Inconvenient, leaving you with a challenge to question the cost of online convenience. If you want to keep learning, subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcast. Your reviews and 5-star ratings help reach more listeners. Until next time, remember, your privacy is never a lost cause. Stay safe, stay private.